Some say that a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood, and skin and bone. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day, hold a hand deep in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. I was born one morning, the sun didn't shine. I picked up my shovel and I crawled to the mine. I loaded 16 tons of the number 9 coal. And the strong boss said, well, bless my soul, you load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older, deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. You see me coming, better step aside. A lot of men didn't, a lot of men died. I got one fist iron and the other one steel. If left it don't get you, then right it sure will. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I hold my soul to the company store. I was born one morning in the drizzling rain, fighting and trouble on my middle names. I was born in a canebrake to an old mama line, and oh, high told boss may make me walk that line. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I hold my soul to the company store. Saint Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Hello, and welcome to the first church of permaculture, where every week I sing a weird song, usually, and we talk about permaculture, regenerating landscapes, livelihoods, and communities. And today, we're going to be talking about this lovely book, Growing Free, Financially Resilient and Economically Empowered. The book about building the life of your dreams without losing your soul or destroying the planet. It's all about understanding that we need people like you and me to be out there doing all sorts of work that we know needs to get done, like regenerating soil, ecosystems, community economies, and yet our economy is probably not going to pay us to do that important work, right? So if you want to if you want to be free to do what you want and do this kind of work, you got to be clever about how you're going to do it, right? Like it's just a reality that there's work that needs to be done that our society won't pay for. Like sitting around watching cartoons in your pajamas. It's not likely that anyone's going to pay you to do that. So if you want to do it, you got to be clever about how you're going to do it. So, with that said, this book is filled with tools and ideas to walk you through a design process to build that financially resilient life where you're going to be economically empowered to live the way you want to live and do the work that you want to do, the work that we know needs to be done. Today, Laura Oldanie, my main co-author on the book, is going to be joining me for a discussion. Actually, all of the contributors to the book are going to be on in this discussion, talking about growing free and sharing their experience and advice. So it's going to be a great discussion. I know it is because I am, through the magic of the internet, recording this now in the future. So Laura Oldanie is a financial coach, a regenerative living coach, and the creator of Rich and Resilient Living. You can Google that and find her. And she and I began working together on creating this kind of course content a few years ago. The content that eventually became Growing Free. And we just started getting a lot of feedback on it that this program and this course really was setting them free and transforming their lives. And so it has been very inspiring as a journey. And this piece of work is so much better than anything I could have created on my own. So I'm so happy to have you listen in on this conversation with Laura and everybody else. Thanks for watching. Okay, we're back. And so, as I was saying, you can watch 3 different recordings of Bill Mollison's permaculture design courses, like on YouTube or different places online. If you're clever and you search them out and you find them. And in all 3, he comes to a part where they talk about the banking and financial stuff. And he says you can read 100 books about organic gardening. Permaculture is about where you bank your money and how you spend it. And he says this, and he talks about asset class analysis and all that. By the way, this stuff is also in this book. This is the newest edition of Rosemary Morrow's Earth. This one is the Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture. The original was the Earth User's Guide to Permaculture. And she talks about these topics in there too. And she and Bill both said, this is the most important part of permaculture. But you do a 72-hour permaculture design course. And in most of them, we only get maybe 2 to 4 hours of this whole content. So I felt the same. That here we have this thing we're calling the most important part. And it's only like, we're only talking about it a teensy little bit. So it really felt like combining that with all these tools from the FIRE movement were great. But the FIRE movement seemed to be about burning the planet with stocks. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And so when did you start your blog, Rich and Resilient Living?
I started that, I think, back in 2017 or 2018. And I actually had a different name for it when I started. And it was a narrower focus because my journey really started initially around the fact that I have money invested in the stock market. And I had moved as much as made sense into socially responsible funds, but I still didn't like that. It was still supporting things that I didn't want it to support. And so I had started learning about some really cool things that I could be investing in if I moved my money out of the stock market, and a way to do it through a self-directed IRA. And so I created my blog initially to share what I was learning and hopefully connect with others that were thinking that way, and maybe learning from them as well, because I know there's a lot more out there that I still don't know. And so that was good to start. But then I also started realizing that, money is only one tool in a resilient lifestyle design. Even if I got it in more regenerative places, it's a much bigger picture that needs to be considered and dealt with. And especially on a climate challenged planet where money, in the way it exists now, being digits and so reliant on electricity and fossil fuels, even just to exist, like your net worth, if the power is down, and you need cash from an ATM, or just in general, if there's ever a larger grid event, there's so much speculation and fragility in financial capital. I really started thinking, recognizing the value of the multiple forms of capital, and just thinking, even within financial capital, thinking more broadly about earning it in different ways, storing it in different ways. And so, that was, so then that became rich and resilient living, because for me, it was much more than just, where am I investing the financial capital, even if it is outside the stock market.
Yeah, boy, even right there, I think you're giving people a lot of information about the kinds of things that we can get out of this synthesis between like the FIRE movement and the kinds of discussions we're having in permaculture. And when we were having these discussions about putting together the class that eventually became this book, one of the things that we were talking about is like how permaculture people, a lot of us want to escape the corporate economy and the rat race, and we want to figure out how to do what we want to do with our lives and to actually support ourselves doing it. We want to be activists, we want to heal soil, we want to feed people, and we want to be able to not die broke in the gutter while doing it. And so this FIRE tools can really help permaculture people if they're adapted. And at the same time, some of our discussions that we're having in the permaculture community about, you mentioned this term, multiple forms of capital, those seem to be able to really help people who are coming at it from like your direction, because you came at this thing because you had money invested in the stock market and you wanted something to be both more resilient and better for the planet. So it's like adding these two things together really creates a complete whole that I think we were lacking otherwise. And so two things that you brought up there that I really want to hear about, I think people want to hear about. I know Sandy wants to hear just a little bit about that idea. You were talking about your self-directed IRA, and I want to hear a little bit about that and about your a couple of investment options. But before we get to that, you also mentioned multiple forms of capital. Now, what the heck does that mean? Isn't capital just money?
Well, that's certainly what our society operates around and presumes that is this form of capital we think of first and foremost and use most frequently. But no, there are other, I think even in our common lexicon, it already exists out there a bit. Like, in the work world, we have this concept of human capital, and I think that's a term that many of us have heard, but it's this idea that there are other forms of capital beyond financial capital. And in fact, when I think about all of the other forms of capital, it seems to me that financial capital is just a way that we've developed to be able to exchange for all of the other forms of capital, and that what we really want are these other forms of capital. And so within permaculture, this is not a concept that's original to permaculture, but there is a well-known article and teaching around it, where it's referred to as the 8 forms of capital. It's the, we can talk through them. So we've got financial capital. I'm not sure I'll remember all of them off the top of my head, but maybe material capital. So our homes, our cars, the laptops or phones we're using to participate in this today, the desk, the hammer, the shovel you use in the garden, these are material forms of capital. We have living capital, which we in permaculture know and love so much. It's all of our plants and trees and the animals. It's the fresh air and water. It's parks in our communities. That's living capital. There's social capital. So that's our relationships with our family, our friends, our church networks, be it the First Church of Permaculture or a more conventional church that we often think of, the schools, all of these networks and communities you have social capital. You're able to access things through that social capital that you have within those groups and connections. There is cultural capital. So Mike started us off today with some beautiful, awesome cultural capital when he sang that song that we shared. We shared that as part of our culture and our common understanding. Art, our history, food, holidays, these are all cultural traditions and capital. Let's see. Oh, intellectual capital. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
And Laura, as you mention all these things, I'm just reminded that money only ever ends up just being like digits in a computer screen, or something that makes my wallet too thick so I can't fit my wallet into my back pocket. But all these other forms of capital you're mentioning, these are the things that really make life feel wealthy, right?
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
and money is just a tool. And we think we want the money, but we really want all these other things. It's just that we've set our culture up in society to operate in a way where we can, maybe, I don't know if this is exactly accurate, but it's easiest and most convenient usually to access the other forms of capital through financial capital. But what we talk about in the book, is this idea of finding opportunities to access these other forms of capital more directly. How can we find ways to bypass financial capital and more directly access the other forms of capital that are actually the things we want? And it's a balance of time and convenience, but Jacob Lund Fisker, who is the author of Early Retirement Extreme, another good book that we reference in our book, I read an interview with him once where he was making the point that, that financial capital is the easiest, most convenient way for us to meet our needs, it reduces some friction, but it's the least creative, way to meet our needs. There's much less opportunity for self-actualization, for sustainability, and going directly to cash to meet our needs.
Well, we also get hung up on, again, that thinking we need this big pile of capital or big pile of cash to do something when, in fact, we don't necessarily view a passive income stream, which there's a gazillion of those out there, that it's not all just investing in something and getting a return for it. But those are also a way to do all of this versus just having a big pile of cash.
Absolutely. I can think of one really great example I'd like to hear you talk about, Laura. And this one is probably familiar to a lot of the people who are on here, because we in permaculture often focus on food a lot. We're a tribe that likes to eat, and we like food. We like to grow food, and so a lot of people in society really have this feeling that to meet that need of feeding ourselves, we need to have that financial capital. We have to go to the store. We have to buy food, and then of course in permaculture we also know that we can grow a lot of our food right in our landscapes, Go figure, you can go outside. There's this food laying there on the ground. Who would have thought it? But you also have another creative way of getting food that you thought.
Yes. So I dumpster dive for a lot of my food because it just infuriates me how much perfectly good food is thrown out by grocery stores. And these are grocery stores that are already donating. They're donating to a lot of nonprofits, but it's such a convoluted, complex, time-sensitive system that's evolved around food, and especially grocery store operations, that there's still plenty of perfectly good food that is going into dumpsters. So for date night, my boyfriend and I will drive around and go dumpster diving. And we have actually gotten some friends into it. And there's one dumpster, it's our local health food store dumpster, where it's now at the point where it is less common for us not to run into friends and people we know there at the dumpster, and more common to run into them, and for it to become a social occasion at the local health food store dumpster. Now that store is very cool about us diving because we're all keep it clean, and whereas some stores, will chase you away. But yeah, and I don't even know. I would probably have to at least take my shoes off and start counting on my toes as well to count how many people, and there's probably more than that I've introduced and gotten excited about dumpster diving because there's still so much food.
And I just think that's such a great example of what you were talking about, because if you solve that need with money, which is the least creative way of doing it, when we're talking about creativity, we're talking about building connections between things. And one of the things we talk about in a lot in our book is that both colonialism and capitalism, the way they work is they break down our connections to community and to nature, and they break those for profit. So if you just take your money and you take it to the store, you're supporting systems like factory farming and pesticides and probably slave labor in the global south and stuff like that with our money when we just solve it that way. So we're actually creating pollution, we're creating all that. But when you solve the problem creatively by rescuing that food from what would be the waste stream, you're rebuilding a connection and you're stopping pollution, you're stopping all of these problems. So that's just such a great example of how when we solve these problems through more creative ways and through thinking about these multiple forms of capital, how we actually we can repair the damage that's done by like colonialism and capitalism. So I just love that example. And this is a great time to ask if anyone else has some questions or has any questions for Laura. And if not, I would like to. I'm gonna ask that, and we'll wait see if anybody unpauses here. I can't see everyone, so if you do, oh, there's Dennis.
I've got a question. Mike and Laura. We are, as some of you may know who know me, we are in process of trying to sell our home. We are moving. We're changing geography, to say the least. We're leaving Florida and we're heading to New Mexico. So it is absolutely and wonderfully going to be a new permaculture for us. If you can imagine that concept, a serious change of ecosystem, if you will. Anyway, we've spent 5 years falling in love with this land and putting together a young but awesome food forest. And we have, to Mike's recommendation about a year ago, I started circulating to everybody I knew that we were going to be leaving, and we wanted to hand this off, to transfer this, to not do the typical real estate thing where we talk to an agent, a buyer would talk to an agent, and then things get lost in the translation and it doesn't get transferred properly. And it's been it's been difficult. We would hope that we would have had more permaculture people show up here, but we only had one couple, and that was months ago when we weren't ready, and they wanted to do something right then, and they found a project elsewhere. They found property, and they I think they were going to build a little cabin there from the ground up, which is wonderful if that suits what they needed to do. But we're getting a lot of these survival types, preppers, etc., and they are more inclined to build bunkers than they are to build community. And if there's any community connection for them at all, it's very limited, and it tends to be their own, not sharing a lot of cultural diversity, if you follow my drift. So I was wondering if you all knew of any good sources out there, any good projects for transferring this type of capital, the traditional real estate capital, and how to transfer that among the permaculture types and the sustainable types. And I know that was kind of a long intro, but I haven't been on Zoom with you all in a while, so I kind of had to run my mouth. I hope you don't mind. This is great what y'all are doing, by the way.
Not at all. So Dennis, I'll suggest a couple things, but I would also suggest this is a larger conversation, and I'm happy to connect with you after this if I can be helpful as well. But I think this isn't directly necessarily permaculture, my first suggestion, but the whole idea of land trust and people, lawyers that have experience with land trusts and may have contacts and know people that would be interested in purchasing and preserving a property. Again, it's not exactly permaculture, but I wouldn't take it in the direction of preppers, although I have found that with other permaculture properties here in Florida that I know of, they've ended up going to, I don't know if it's the preppers and survivalists have more money or cash on hand than many of the younger aspiring permaculturalists that we're trying to help out. But I do have a land conservation lawyer contact that I've been given here in Tampa, and I'd be happy to give you her number, and she may have some contacts or ideas for your area. So that would be one suggestion I would make. And then the other would be to reach out to the Sustainable Economies Law Center, which is based in Oakland, and many of those lawyers are familiar with permaculture, in fact, trained in it, and they may have some ideas or contacts for you as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course, on Facebook, we do have the, there are a couple of groups for permaculture properties. I wonder how much of this really is that issue that Laura just brought up, that a lot of younger people who are aspiring permaculturists may just not have the capital to be able to make that investment and make that kind of jump. I'm sure there are people we could find who are dreaming of your property there, Dennis, but probably can't connect to the resources to make it happen. This is a big part of why we wrote this book, because we need to start thinking in the way that some more conservative type communities have. A lot of people who might be preppers might be from family backgrounds where they're really aggressive about helping each other accumulate capital and really helping each other out. And when you blow that up as a pattern over society, that becomes a thing that looks like white privilege and systems of oppression, where we're keeping money in certain kind of communities, as Dennis said, people who look like us. And so we really need to start thinking as a permaculture community about how we can grow our social capital and political capital and grow regenerative wealth within our broader community, so that we can start connecting people to these sorts of resources better. This is one of the secret kind of goals for the book that we wrote. And on one level, this is a book that we put together to help real people achieve their dreams of buying Dennis's property. And then on the other hand, we're talking about we really need to think like community organizers who are building a movement that's going to have more resources, more wealth, and more power moving forward, you know? Because the way it is, it's usually, you know, who ends up with all the money in our society? It's people who only think about money and want to turn everything into money all the time.
Right.
We need people like us to have more of those resources too. So that was just a great.
And one thing, other thing I'll add, and this kind of goes towards the self-directed IRA that I didn't go back to. Another area, and I don't think we can move on this quickly enough to help Dennis in this situation, but another area where we're ripe for doing things better, or even just doing these things in permaculture, is there are pockets, little pockets of money, financial capital in our permaculture realm. You know, where if, you know, someone who like me with a self-directed IRA, you know, if we could pull multiple people together that had $5,000 or $10,000 they were looking to invest and pool it in a fund so that we could provide the mortgage to a young permaculture person, you know, or whoever it is in the permaculture space that doesn't have that financial capital to buy Dennis's property. But we need that legal structure. We need the financial and legal structure to make everyone feel whole going into that arrangement. And, you know, I think that's where, you know, if someone can work with the SCLC, or if there are other people, you know, friends of permaculture who are steeped in law, you know, if we had that in place already, that might be a solution for Dennis.
Yeah, this is just really an area for growth for our whole movement, I think. And we some of this sort of thing was happening in the permaculture movement at one point in time, and maybe we were lacking some of the tools to sustain that and keep it going. But I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to find some energy and connect with some energy to rebuild that and restart that way of thinking. Since we've written this book, we're already starting to talk about some other projects along things like this. Eric is talking about kind of doing a remix of Growing Free that's about building local and revitalizing local economies and towns specifically. Because a lot of the stuff in our book is geared towards that. It's like, if you're an activist who wants to rebuild your local economy, that's the kind of thing that we really tried to load into this book. And I just think this is, you know, we got to be doing more than just growing food. I know I said it 20 minutes ago. We're a community of people who really like food. But if we want to get serious about the kinds of problems we care about, we just need to start thinking a lot more about things like the economy. Hey, you mentioned that issue of your self-directed IRA, and so that's another thing that that some people who may be watching this might be on one of their problems that we're hoping to try to help them with. And that's people who have money in places like the stock market, like you were saying, and they don't feel like they really meet your needs, and they don't match your values. And maybe we have some options beyond that. And Sandy, I know you had mentioned this before. Do you have more to say about that?
Well, I don't have a lot to say. I have some money in Vanguard. You know, I mean, I'm not exactly happy about it. I'm happy that I have money as I come to my old age. Just had my birthday. And so, well, you know, you start to think about stuff, right? Craig's going to retire at the end of the year next year. And our kids are finally going to be done with school. So you know, our kids don't have any loans coming out of school. So we're very lucky. We're very privileged, I realize. But I also don't want to be a burden to my kids as they start their lives, because we're older parents. And so I would like to do something with the money other than just have it in index funds, because index funds are kind of yucky. That's all I really have to say. You know, I am clueless about what to do with it, though.
Indeed. And I want to say something about that before Laura answers. I'll give her a second chance to think. But also, I want to say A happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sandy. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Uh, so, and you mentioned that, you mentioned Vanguard and you mentioned index funds. For people who don't know what those are, this is a way of investing in the whole stock market. So when so an index fund makes very broad investments in a whole index and a whole market. And so that instead of trying to pick the winners or losers, you just pick it all. And, and ideally over time, different things win and different things lose, but the market continues to grow. So it's turned out, since these were invented, they're just really, it's hard to beat these as investments. So a lot of people are putting the money into them. The downside is, when you invest in an index fund, you're investing in the winners and the losers together, which means that you're investing in the companies that are driving climate change. You're investing in coal, you're investing in natural gas and oil, things that we know aren't the future. So it really makes no sense in that way. So for those of us who want to invest in building a better future, this becomes a big issue. So Laura, tell us a little bit more about like this idea of a self-directed IRA and about some other options that I have.
So yes, to the extent that middle-class Americans have retirement savings, most of it is in, retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs. And when we invest that way, because of the nature of those vehicles, we're pretty much limited to the, very extractive investments on Wall Street, stocks and bonds and derivatives, things we don't even understand. They're so complex.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt you again, but I do want to say, we make this point a lot in the book, that if you're stuck in those kinds of situations and you're trapped there, then we have to have compassion for ourselves, right? Especially as we're moving into retirement, we don't have the privilege to just like die broke in a gutter, right? So we have to be compassionate with ourselves, accept that we're stuck in this system. And I also know that Sandy's taking a permaculture design course and doing things because she also wants to help build that future, So I just like to point out that we can do things that are positive even while we're stuck in the extractive economy, and we can also do some of these other options. I just really
I have a comment too after you're finished.
Yeah, I just really want to reiterate this. It's so important that we have that sense of compassion. And yeah, Jenny, feel free before we come back.
Yes, I will say, okay, we may not have the privilege to be perfect or whatever, like it's not an ideal world, but at the same time, okay, I'm speaking as a boomer. Okay, I'm 60, so I'm on the young edge of the boomers, but I identify with the boomers, and I see us boomers whining about insecurity when we have 3, 4, and 5 houses, when we are millionaires. We keep jet setting around the world while being, claiming to be environmentalists. And, I'm like, hey, boomer, buy your kid a fucking house. If you want security in your old age, why don't you just buy your kid a house, or move near them and babysit the grandkids, or buy your kid a commercial building on the dilapidated main street of your town that is languishing while your money is on Wall Street. Like, part of why I'm impatient with us boomers is I saw my grandparents when I was growing up. They had a happy, tranquil old age. They owned their houses free and clear. They didn't have a lot of money. They got their Social Security, whatever. And then I see the people my age and older that are living lifestyles of the rich and famous, and they're still insecure, and nothing's ever enough. And some of them won't stop working because they still want more money. So I really want my fellow boomers to realize how many forms of capital there are. And there's no use having 4 houses and $1 million if you don't even know your neighbor and you don't even have anyone to watch your cat when you go on vacation. But I also want to give a shout out to my friend, one of my local friends, George Ann, who I met through Native Plant Society. And, you know, talking about dumpster diving earlier, I've many a dumpster dived in my lifetime. But then there's also Mother Nature's vast trove of native plant matter and so-called weeds that I routinely forage and get nutritious greens. And so when we talk about how capitalism has fragmented our relationships with nature and community, it messes with plant communities too, like our relationships with plants. You know, as I speak, we just had a hurricane and people are like mowing and blowing their lawn. I'm like, no. So yeah, lots more I could say about that, but it's really great to talk about repairing connection with our communities and nature. And I think I just saw Eric type in the chat about defining enough. Yes, defining enough is something that we talk extensively about in the Growing Free book. It's really important to know what enough is.
Yes, yes. And in this lovely book right here, this is one of the first copies to come out. So yeah, we talk about that. And we also talk about, I saw Sandy get excited about one of these other ideas. So one of the ways that we broke down investing in the book is investing in the old economy and the new economy we want to see. So we broke things down and gave big lists of investments that kind of like minimize the harm of the old economy. Like, what are things we can do there? And then we also created a whole huge list of new economy investments too. And I think that we're all, you know, most of us end up having to do a bit of both. So yeah, Laura, back to you on this idea of some old economy investments.
So I want to preface this with that I am not a financial advisor. This is just my personal experience. And every one of us has a unique situation. So Sandy, what I'm going to talk about is, you know, information about what I did. You know, it would take a whole lot more conversations and thinking to know if this is exactly right for you. These are just some options. So these retirement accounts, like what you have with Vanguard or with people who have employer-based retirement accounts, those are what everyone knows. But there's also something called a self-directed IRA. And it can be a conventional IRA where it's the tax-deferred money, or you can have a self-directed Roth. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but you know, the tax-deferred is that you don't pay taxes on the money when you're putting it in the account. You pay the taxes later in your older age when you're taking the money out. A Roth, you pay income tax on that money when you put it in the account, but then it's tax-free later in life. And there's also solo 401ks. You can have those, and for if you have your own business or an entrepreneur. And these accounts allow you to invest in an extremely wide range of assets. You know, like pretty much anything you can think of that is a legal thing that you could put your money in. You can own real estate in a self-directed IRA. I just invested in a moringa collective that's based here in the state of Florida that a friend of mine from I know through Permaculture started. I have an ownership share in a permaculture farm here in Florida through this self-directed IRA. That's an allowable investment. It does take more time and effort and work, but if this is something people want to commit to and learn about, and you know, that's one way to do it. These things that I've invested in, they're also things that are available to anyone to invest in. It doesn't have to be through an IRA or a retirement account. Those are just tax mechanisms.
Mhm.
You know, anyone who has $1,000 or however much is the minimum investment, you know, needed, like there are crowdfunding websites like WeFunder where you can go in, and I found a Native American food business at one point that was raising capital, and I could invest $100, you know, as little as $100 to support this food business and earn a profit. Now, these are all investments. There's risk. with any of them. So I make many small investments. That's how I mitigate risk. And, again, you can do it through a tax deferred method or a tax advantaged method, or you can just outright make these investments, and take your money out of those accounts or leave the money in your Vanguard account, and money you get in the future, be investing in other things, and you or anybody.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that for this section of the book that you contributed, you broke it down so that people can think about what they're passionate about, and like you included like the crowdfunding platforms that you just mentioned, social justice investing in the solidarity economy, investing in the local economy. So I just like that there are different options. People think, and we just don't talk about them in our society. We don't talk about the options that people really have. So it's great. I think it's great that we included all that in this book so that people do see that those options are out there.
I would love to see people come to a permaculture class and have their design project be like, design a local investing cooperative. How do we get more permaculture design projects that are around regenerative wealth and not just a landscape? Not that the landscapes aren't great. I did mine as a landscape, but I also didn't have an option to do another design project, really.
Yeah.
Seriously, that'd be great.
In my PDCs, I always encourage and accept non-landscape types of design projects. I agree. I think they're really important. And when we talk about some of these things you mentioned, like just think about this discussion we're having right here and some of the things that have come up in Bill Molson's original conception of permaculture. He talked about there being kind of a three-part system for building the movement, having our individual projects, which can include a lot of different sorts of regenerative investments by themselves too, which we talk about literally like 40 different types ways of regenerative enterprise and investments for the new economy in the book. And then also having nonprofit type structures to help to help save on taxes and to help build the movement and help direct funds to help people make these investments. And then we're always, kind of the grand vision is for us to set up what Bill Molson called regenerative enterprise corporations, regenerative investment corporations, where, and Bill Molson said, he'll finish talking about that. And he says, this is what permaculture is. I want you to do this. Now, Bill Molson really said, this is what he wants permaculture to become, is something where we have these discussions and talk within our local communities about how we set up regenerative investment corporations where we literally get together with our community members and invest in the kinds of communities and kind of future we want to see. To me, this is just the most exciting conversation we can have in permaculture. So I'm so glad that you joined us today for this little bit of a teaser to get people thinking about that, Laura. And I want to just give a little bit more space in case anyone has like one last question before we finish up. Anybody, any last thoughts here?
I'd like to share a last thought. It kind of goes back to something Eric said at the beginning, and it's something a concept we introduce in the book is this holistic balance sheet. And I think we've certainly alluded to it in this conversation with the multiple forms of capital, but Eric was talking about getting hung up during our coaching sessions on a certain dollar amount, and thinking like, I need a certain amount of money. And I think that the more we can get in the habit of, and maybe even train ourselves to think in these multiple forms of capital and to think about, how much are they saving us? Where does that dollar amount? It's kind of like in-kind contributions to your retirement fund. If when you can tap these multiple forms of capital. So how do we get better as we're thinking about our own financial journey, whether it's earlier in life or if it's retirement planning, and really thinking through a holistic balance sheet for ourselves.
Yeah, if you don't know where you want to end up, how will you ever get there? The more time we spend thinking about and creating that vision for what we want our lives to be like, and what does a wealthy life feel like to you, right? The more we figure that out, the more likely it is that we are to be able to create that. One of the people who previewed the book and who's gotten back to me and given me feedback said this exact thing. They said they expected this to be a book about money, and they said instead it felt like this profound spiritual book. There were all of these kinds of things about what is the real meaning of money, and what is the real meaning of life, and what do we want to get out of our lives. But to us, like as we discussed it and we were writing this book, it feels like, how can you even have a discussion about money without talking about these deeper issues? Yeah. So, Laura, next week we're going to be we're going to be going live a little bit more, and we're going to be talking about one of these tools that we've come up with to help people design rich and resilient lives, to use your blog title there, and that is that we want to imitate the thistle, because the thistle is a very resilient weed, right? It is, these pioneer species have learned to thrive by being very resilient. So we've kind of looked at some of the things that the thistle and other pioneer species do in order to create, to be very resilient and to build wealth into their communities, because that's what thistles do. Like all weeds, they invest in regenerating the soil, right? I know we permaculture people know this. So we're going to be talking about that next week, yeah?
Yes, on Wednesday. We're taking the message to Instagram and TikTok. Watch out, TikTok.
That's right. So if you want to know how to design your life to be like a thistle, look for that, and we'll post about it on Facebook too, so you'll know the times and everything. All right. Any last thoughts from anybody?
When are those books coming to us? Those of us who have ordered already.
They should start shipping. They might, the first books might start getting to you right around a little bit after Thanksgiving. Okay. So they'll get there. The official launch date is the 28th, but I've noticed sometimes people might even get them as early as the 26th. So they'll start shipping.
I will say one last thing. Like, it might sound like some of my comments about boomers were really harsh, but a lot of it stems from my sadness at watching my parents, my silent generation parents, fall into that insecurity, and then seeing my fellow boomers fall into it. It's like, we can't afford this, and I don't want people to be suffering, like to be drowning in money and then also suffering and being basically poor. It's like heartbreaking, and it doesn't work for the planet. So that's why I love our book so much. It's going to hopefully help a lot of people get out of that trap.
I sure hope so. And so thank you again for joining me to talk about this topic. And as we always do, I'll finish this off with the world's oldest song that we still know of, and that we know the melody, and it seems very appropriate. As long as you live in love, let nothing trouble you. Life is only too short, and time takes its toll. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the First Church of Permaculture. And Laura, again, thanks for joining. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.